at UCL. Professor Costello, thank you very much indeed for being with us. What for you are the key conclusions from this report?
Well, the first is that this was a catastrophe. I mean, 160,000 families are grieving still, and that's, 50 times the casualty rate of 9/11. And the Select Committee have done a pretty good job at unraveling an awful lot of information we wouldn't have had otherwise. And so, they've identified the early problems of the scientists in groupthink, who almost from day one thought there was nothing we could do to suppress the virus. And then the whole problems with testing and contact tracing, the lockdowns being delayed. But I think there are some questions still to be answered and why we need a judicial review. I mean, for example, on the SAGE group, why was there no independent public health expert there? We had clinical academics, mathematicians, and behavioral scientists, but this was a public health problem. And they had a very narrow view of science. You needed population scientists. When I worked at WHO on pandemic crisis team, you had frontline care, logistics, communications, nurses, social science. And they also didn't seem to be listening to what was happening in East Asia. By the end of February, I mean, your timeline was very detailed. By the end of February last year, it was clear from a WHO report on China and stats coming out of South Korea that they were already suppressing their epidemic. And they were giving details about how this was done with accurate contact tracing and testing and the like. And yet we hadn't set that up. In fact, we'd stopped community testing on March the 12th, which, as the committee says, crazy.
But there were also mistakes being made elsewhere, weren't there? Not just here by our government and by scientists. The World Health Organization as well didn't recommend specific advice for travellers. In fact, it said that talking about the restrictions on the freedom of movement of people was harmful.
Yeah, that's true. And I think things have changed. I mean, WHO were to a large extent reflecting the international health regulations that all countries had signed up to, where they don't really want travel restrictions unless absolutely mandated because, they're worried about the economic effects. But I think you're right that actually, those countries that did lock down or rather put up border controls very quickly, like Taiwan and New Zealand, have had very low case rates and very low death rates. So I would agree with that.
What of the argument that is being used by the government now that this is hindsight? We were in an unprecedented pandemic. We were learning as we went through it.
I must say I disagree with that. By the end of January, there were papers being published showing that this was a new, different virus. It was much more transmissible and much more fatal, actually, than influenza. And in addition to the problems that we had with this sort of blinkered approach by the British scientists without public health inputs, because I'm sure they would have blocked, any decent public health person would have stopped the kind of herd immunity approach. But then you had a prime minister who failed to attend the first 5 COBRA meetings when a pandemic is the biggest threat other than war. And to miss 5 meetings in 6 weeks when this was unfolding is very difficult. It's certainly true that then, Iran, then Italy were really hit fast by this, but we had 2 weeks on Italy. And so I often think, why haven't we done, for example, as well as Germany? We don't necessarily have to compare ourselves with, China, which has 3 per million deaths. Ours is at over 2,000 per million deaths. Germany is at about 1,000. So, you could argue we could have halved our mortality rate if we had followed more attentive and early public health measures of infection control.
And Germany, of course, was behind us in getting off the ground with the vaccine rollout. Now, let's talk a bit more about the vaccines, because that is one positive to come out of this report, that the government was fast to identify the need for a vaccine and to purchase those vaccines even before licences had been issued, and also treatments like dexamethasone, for example.
Yeah, no question on that the vaccine development was excellent. The procurement was excellent, very smart moves there. And, the Oxford group did a lot of great work on testing, the various drugs and showed the role of dexamethasone. But, have we learnt the lessons of our public health failure, which, of course, led to a lot of the initial problems? We still have many of the same structures in place, the same people. And there's still something of a herd immunity mentality. We're not using masks in the way that European and East Asian countries are. We're not showing public health safety measures in schools and in the workplaces. We've blocked global vaccination by blocking patent waivers along with the European Union and Canada. And our public health systems at local level still need a lot to be desired, and they're disconnected from the centre. So I think we've got a very long way to go. And I just hope that this high level of cases that we're still running at, nearly 40,000, and a death rate today of 180, that means more than 30,000 deaths per year if we carry on at this rate. We just hope it's not going to be about winter.
OK, Professor Anthony Costello, thanks very much indeed. Professor Costello just mentioned the latest figures there. Almost 140,000 people have died